それでは、始め
Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin the program. Thank you very much for participating despite your very busy schedule. Thank you very much. This is the start of 2021 political change in Afghanistan and international society. This is the extraordinary seminar. I am Akiko Horiba, the senior researcher of Asia Project Group of Sasakawa Peace Foundation. I'd like to make some housekeeping announcements. So this seminar should not be recorded visually or sound-wise without the permission of the Secretariat. Also, in this seminar, simultaneous interpretation is available both in Japanese and English. Please click the button describing interpretation, and please select the language of your choice. At the very end of the seminar, we have some time for discussion. If you have questions or comments, please make your entry into question and answer column. As time permitting, moderator will read your questions and we will ask the speakers to respond. You can enter your questions anytime you like. After the seminar, we would like to have your cooperation for a questionnaire survey. If you retire from the Zoom, you will go to the questionnaire form. This is anonymous questionnaire, so time permitting, we will be very happy if you can cooperate with us. If you retire in the middle of the program, you can respond to the questionnaires. If there are some disconnection of internet and webinar is suspended, and if it does not recover in 10 minutes, we will cancel this event. If you need the materials of the speakers, you can email Asia Project Group of Asia Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Please contact us. Also, this seminar will be available on YouTube on the site of Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Sorry for the lengthy housekeeping announcement. We'd like to commence the seminar.
President Tsunami, are you ready? Could you please switch on your camera? In opening the seminar, I would like to ask Dr. Atsushi Tsunami, the president of SPF, to say a few words of greetings. The President Tsunami, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for 2021 Political Change in Afghanistan and International Society, the webinar by the SPF. I serve as the president of SPF. As you may know, President Biden has decided to have full withdrawal of the US military from Afghanistan at the end of August. From the May onwards, full-fledgedly, the Taliban has started its offensive, and in the middle of August, the Taliban has placed the whole of Afghanistan, majority of the Afghanistan under control. And when President Ghani has escaped to the outside of the country on the 15th, the Democratic administration has, in substance, have fallen down. And there has been suicide bombing by the ISIS. The last week, the tension seems to be escalating in Afghanistan. The world over is in great shock because of what is happening in Afghanistan. And at the webinar today, this is a seminar being held as an emergency. And after I have become the president of the SPF in May, we have His Excellency, the ambassador of the Republic of Afghanistan. I went to give my greetings, and I was told how to maintain the peace in Afghanistan and what that may be the progress going forward. And the ambassador wanted to work closely with the SPF to provide advice in trying to have Afghanistan to further grow and develop. And I have stated that, including the experts, the SPF would like to be engaged in debate and discussion as to how we will be able to assist Afghanistan going forward. I did not believe at all at the time that Afghanistan would see these kind of developments so soon. So this is the reason why we have this urgent seminar today, including myself. We have been quite poor in our analysis and forecast as to what may happen in Afghanistan. So today, we have the experts who are well-versed in situation in Afghanistan. Mr. Yamamoto, former Special Representative of the Secretary General for the United Nations for Afghanistan, and who has been with the UNAMA. We also have Mr. Komino, General Secretary of GWS Japan and co-chairperson for the Japan platform. And also Professor Tanaka, the professor of Kyoto University, and also His Excellency, Dr. Shaida Mohammed Abdali, the ambassador of the Embassy of Afghanistan in Japan. How to understand the developments in Afghanistan and what can the international community in Japan should do. I very much hope that we will be able to have good discussion. We are co-organizing the webinar with Mixed Grant in Aid for a transformative research area A, connectivity and trust building in Islamic civilization, as well as the Japan platform, the NPO. I would like to thank all the speakers, as well as all the co-organizers who have been working closely with us. The SPF, with the Asia Peace Initiative Department at the center, we are putting our emphasis on peace building, especially the peace mediation support, including peace mediation, intermediation, and support the peace talks, especially for many years. So we have been committing ourselves to Southern Thailand conflict resolution, the peace building, and especially in the peace mediation areas. The shock has been too great as to the development of Afghanistan, and amongst the global actors who are engaged in the peace mediation, they are having a rethink of how to approach the situation, especially SPF. In terms of Islam diversity, dialogue, research, and publishing that have been done. But with these dramatic changes happening in Afghanistan, we are also planning to have not only the seminar today, but also to have many other activities, seminars and lectures and so forth. I hope that you would continue to watch closely the initiatives taken by the SPF. The seminar today would discuss the developments in the surrounding countries, as well as what is on the agenda of Taliban, what is the reaction of international community, the developments of United Nations and NGO going forward, from broad perspective, looking at the current state of play in Afghanistan, how to understand what is happening. For the maintenance of peace, what should be the role to be played by Japan? And through this case of Afghanistan, this is a good opportunity to once again think about Afghanistan. We would like to listen closely to the presenters, and I'm looking forward to have very active exchange of views with all the participants. As soon as possible, I hope that the situation in Kabul and Afghanistan as a whole will settle down. And I would like to thank your kind attention. I'm looking forward to the good discussion. President Tsunami, thank you very much. Before asking the speakers to give their presentations, let me very briefly point to some of the issues and look back into the flow of things up until now. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may know, Afghanistan has been a place where diverse ethnic groups have gathered. It has been a confluence of different civilizations. It is quite a historical, romantic place. It has been hub of the Silk Road. It has been said to be the crossroads of civilization. Right now, 39 billion people reside there, with Pashtuns, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, and Uzbeks, and many other ethnic groups residing. But because of the geopolitical agenda of the great powers. Afghanistan has always been involved in different wars. One turning point was 1979, the aggression by Soviet Union into Afghanistan. And this has brought in the Mujahideen, the fighters from all over the world to Afghanistan to fight the sacred war or the Intifada. I am specializing in Southeast Asia, but Afghanistan is an often spoken the country and place for the radicals in Southeast Asia, and also some of the leaders of the armed groups for the separatist movements in the Asia. Afghanistan is a location of fond memories. Back in the 1980s, the youth from Southeast Asia that have gone to Afghanistan as Mujahideen to fight the sacred war. After the Soviet Union has withdrawn, there has been a leadership fight amongst the different groups, and it has plunged into civil war. And then Taliban appears from 1996 onwards with a biased Islamic law with the extreme interpretation. They have ruled by terror and fear. And they have accepted Al-Qaeda with Osama Bin Laden as the leader, and they have accommodated Al-Qaeda to be active inside Afghanistan. And in 2001, 9/11 had happened, and ever since then, the United States, as a center, the Allied forces have exercised their force in Afghanistan, and Taliban government has fallen. Ever since then, the international community has intervened, and the peace and reconstruction process has begun. In Afghanistan, there are many issues, but perhaps we need to review on the reconstruction process as well as the bond peace the process led by the United Nations in 2001. The objective of the bond peace agreement was the reconciliation as well as peace and stability had to be established. The various countries as well as the international community that has supported Afghanistan for peace building and reconstruction. Japanese government has invested $6.8 billion in 20 years to provide assistance. But because Afghanistan is a multiracial nation with a complicated topology, there are different groups with different cultures and thoughts, and centralized the state in Kabul, was it truly acceptable to Afghanistan? There is a big question. The rule and governance that was problematic, how to draw the line between the ethnic tribes as well as religious sects. Perhaps we need to verify once again what has been the problem, what has been the challenge to do with the international community assistance to Afghanistan, including the National Army, the organization. On the other hand, the reconstruction process where the international community has been involved has been accepted and that highly appreciated by many people in Afghanistan. Hope was given to many people. They have also been actively involved in the process themselves. But right now, many people are trying to escape from Afghanistan because they fear retaliation from the Taliban. The Japanese embassy and NGO and the staffs and Afghan people, the family, the members need to be evacuated from the humanitarian consideration. But right now, the self-defense force or the aircraft are being stymied. And some of the family of the NGO, Afghanistan staffs have been excluded. How to save them and how to accept them in Japan? How should assist them? This would be the urgent issue. What would be the impact of the international community? The backdrop to how US has decided the full withdrawal of its military, and including the US-China, the conflict and the competition, it is crucial to try to look at what is happening. And as the security situation deteriorates, we need to think about the rights of the women and how to have the minorities' rights to be respected. There are many human rights issues being concerned. the various governments, what may be their attitude towards Afghanistan and the Taliban, because the refugees would be increasing and there will be increased need for humanitarian assistance. What about the NGOs who have been active inside Afghanistan? What can Japan do? And can we just follow the US lead? What should be our stance in terms of international cooperation? The Japanese government and the private sector needs to work as one to play the role of intermediary going forward, because there is increasing needs for peace mediation. We need to be also mindful of how the Islamic radicals may move going forward. With the radicals of the Al-Qaeda, the grouping, have celebrating the Taliban's victory, and they are becoming increasingly active. For example, in Indonesia, the government is trying to reinforce its counter-terrorism unit because they're concerned that acts of terror may increase. This is a highly complicated situation. The security may deteriorate with the ISIS also becoming active. What would be the extreme interpretation of the Islamic law by the Taliban? The reaction of the other the Muslims may also be important, because there are 1.7 billion the Muslims in the world. And what may be the logic of the Islamic law? We need to have more in-depth understanding of the Taliban. Today, we have experts including all the issues that I have mentioned, to give us in-depth analysis, first of all, to understand the current situation and try to provide with us good advice and suggestions to our future debate. SPF for these issues. The seminar today will not be the end. Through study groups as well as lecture meetings, we hope to further deepen our debate and discussion. So I hope that you would continue to participate. Now let me turn to the speakers. I would like to first of all invite Professor Tanaka from Keio University. Up until August 2019, he was the managing director of Institute of Energy Economics Japan, as well as the director for Japanese Institute of the Middle Eastern Economics. He was the policy affairs officer of UNAMA, and he was also a member of the European Union Election Observation Mission in Afghanistan. He would be talking about the intent as well as strategy of Taliban, and including Iran and other surrounding countries. Please.
Thank you very much. Time is limited, so immediately I will go into the substance. But before that, situation is so fluid as we see now, and serious developments are happening, and you are organizing this seminar. You have provided such an opportunity. I'd like to thank Sasaka Peace Foundation for doing so. Without further ado, I will go to the substance. The title of my presentation is the objective and strategy of Taliban. So they have come back to power. Now, what is up on their mind? How do they see the international situation? How do they regard their own positioning in the international community? And also this political change in Afghanistan could impact other surrounding areas. It may have a ripple effect. So I'd like to talk about that. But before going into that subject, for the last couple of days, or shall I say 2 weeks, President Biden of the United States appears on TV, and he emphasized one thing. US, to begin with, did not have any intention of reconstructing Afghanistan. I have a very strong sense of incongruity, and I'm angry at what he said. Certainly after September 11th, the specific self-defense force was exercised, and there was a war on terrorism. The first objective is the elimination and disintegration of the terror organization that was held by G.W. Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. Four presidents consecutively made this point very clear. The biggest point of that was the killing the Osama Bin Laden of Al-Qaeda. It was accomplished on the 1st of May in 2011. So that was mission accomplished. However, as a matter of fact, quite opposite to what Mr. Biden says, US itself has committed in the reconstruction of the state of Afghanistan. George W. Bush, President Bush made a commitment regarding the reconstruction of the state. And during the Obama administration, Islamic state of Afghanistan, the governance capability would be enhanced and reform would be pursued. That was said as the objective at that time. US troops were reinforced, and then the dispatched troops had the slogan of clear, hold, build. So they wanted to eliminate the Taliban forces, and they wanted to have the stable civilian government. That was what the US was making efforts. So US was not intending to that. That is what Mr. Biden says. I have some issues with that. After September 11 of 2001, US had the military intervention, and Taliban was disintegrated, but they did not perish. They will hide in the region and local areas, and they fled to outside Afghanistan, and they were waiting for the days of their comeback. And they continued their combating. They have continued their armed conflict. What was the reception of Taliban until now? So after the peace process of 2001, Taliban was disintegrated, they were dispersed, and Taliban with the substance was difficult to see. From that point onward, what started was the Afghans themselves formed some political groups, and they have some militia group or armed warlords and so forth. Amongst these factions, some of them were hostile against one another, and they said that their enemies were Talibans, and the word Taliban was used to incriminate these hostile enemies. So they wanted to have foreign forces to eliminate their enemies. I think that was their ulterior motive. At that time, Taliban was beginning to emerge as a force, and then the NATO forces, US and UK forces, and national armies, when they are attacked, what are the attacking forces? They didn't know, but everything was termed as a Taliban's. The first one is the others nomenclature, and the second point would be general nomenclature. So without knowing, within the society, Taliban, the word Taliban came back. And gradually it had some substance to it. What is happening now is self-nomenclature, self-claimed Talibans, combatants are using that they are Taliban to legitimize their actions. So they use the word Taliban, and the Taliban as a substance exists. So rapidly, Taliban forces are expanding. By these people, the Taliban expanding is supported. It's a kind of snowball effect. So as a result of that, international community and other countries, including Japan, wanted to support Afghanistan. What is the real substance of anti-government forces of Taliban? And we have come to sort of recognize that. Now the self-claimed Taliban is expanding, and snowball effect is happening, and the Taliban as a phenomenon and organization are expanding. What is explicit about that is that objectives are different, and different groups have different motives, but they are being consolidated. Is there a leadership force? If there is one, what is the leadership force? So Taliban 2021 has two missions as a concentric forces. One is that they want to liberate Afghanistan from the yoke of occupation armies. So they think that Afghanistan Islamic Republic is a puppet government. So today or tomorrow, the foreign forces will become invisible, then mission number one would be accomplished. That is liberating Afghanistan from the occupying forces. The second one is to resurrect the Islamic State based upon Sharia. Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, as they call it, has to be the resurgence. The one point is accomplished, then in order to strengthen the bond of Taliban, then number two objective would be the focus. As of now, Taliban in the international community would like to improve their reputation in the international community. They want to be recognized, and in the end, they want to have a seat in the United Nations General Assembly. But in order to get that, they have to show that they are soft. They have to make a softer expression. They have to explain their policy in a softer ways. Especially that's number two, Sharia-based Islamic State has to be resurrected. By doing so, only the Taliban can have the bond, and Taliban can show the discipline. So I think weakening the second objective would be weakening the Islamic State. So in fact, as a matter of essence, the number two objective to weaken is a very difficult thing to foresee. But Taliban is going to at the helm of the government, and then international community, they need the international aid. So the facade has to be very soft, and they will not change the facade. But in terms of essence, they are not different from the past, or more than in the past. They are respecting and observing the Sharia in order to resurrect the Islamic State in Afghanistan, including the internal strife. There were forces fighting against the Taliban, so-called warlords. However, now they are almost non-existent. It's very ironical, but Japan in Afghanistan gave assistance to Afghanistan, and we had the DDR, disarmament and the demobilization and reunification. It went very well. So the leaders and organization may remain, but the private army that they had, or militia that they had, became rather non-existent, and their armed weaponry was all recovered and collected. Therefore, in the northern part of Afghanistan, Taliban is expanding its force, and therefore warlord is not showing any resistance because of this. Of course, Afghanistan has to become a legitimate force. Afghanistan has to be functioning very properly, and warlords had to be eliminated, and DDR was doing very well, which was the reason why we did not have any major internal rebellions within the country. However, now there is no resisting forces. This is partly due to the DDR. Now the problem, no matter how peaceful they may show, and no matter how they may negate the relationship with terrorism, the relationship with Al-Qaeda is maintained. So because of that, necessarily, Al-Qaeda and ISIS have a very sour relationship. So the Taliban and ISIS continue to have a very sour relationship. So Taliban is going to have the control over Afghanistan, and this can be the hotbed for future conflicts and fighting. Now the leadership, the cabinet is going to be announced shortly, but the core leadership, if you look into the core leadership, the veteran militants are having the power. In the core part of the government, so-called conscientious people, or they still look militant, but somewhat they may have changed their course of policies. These people have been removed from the core part. So the future of Taliban direction is something for us to be concerned about in the going forward. Now, talking about regions, Afghanistan, Islamic Republic of Afghanistan could be analyzed in this way. Afghanistan, Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was in the center, and then Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, India were there, and the US, Japan, Australia, so-called Quad existed. So this was the framework. So a Sino-US confrontation, and the Russia-Chinese and the Iran, also India were confrontational. Also the India-Pakistan was at odds. So it was a very complicated situation. However, the red arrows would show you the direction that one, China can be a focal point, and another one is Pakistan can be another focal point. So Pakistan and China relationship between the two can be the central force in the Afghanistan-related relationship. So Afghanistan and India would come closer, and then the US could have its development, and then there may be some West pressure exerted. So this was now they are going to have Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan as a new form. And then the arrows and the colors, the directions of arrows and colors became different. Afghanistan and India have different relationship. Afghanistan and US have a different relationship. Because of these changes in Afghanistan, US presence is weakened, and India's influence is also weakened. For Pakistan, considering their relationship with India, so the strategic weight can be sought in Afghanistan. Once again, viewed from China, in Afghanistan, US bases will no longer be there. And then India will use Afghanistan as the bridgehead, and they want to go to Central Asia. So China is now able to check India about that. So in many ways, West Asia to Central Asia and to South Asia. So this is the crossroad of civilization. In this particular area, great game is again to be staged. I think that is the situation that we're going to see. The last point, the peripheral countries and the international society, what will be the impact? So without having US, there will be no more United States in Afghanistan. This was the development that we saw in recent times. It is almost incompleted like that. Is that win-win for the neighboring countries? No, that's not the case. For Iran, Pakistan, there will be an increased influx of refugees, especially in Pakistan. Sunnis extremism can be a threatening force. And then also the prevalence of drug could be another problem. So on the other hand, the US Biden administration abruptly decided on the withdrawal, and there is a wobbling of the reputation by the allies. Of course, Taiwan is different, Korea is different, and Japan is different. We cannot discuss all allies on the same level. However, as you can see, US cannot be depended upon. That can be a resources. And then China can go into the psychological warfare. So we have given the material for China to develop psychological warfare. More than anything, US will prioritize the China policy. So they have continued to withdraw from this area because they thought that the China strategy is more important. However, this current move is not necessarily good for that policy. For Quad, for the United States, backside of China, the authority is now being lost to keep authoritative eyes. For India, the regional strategy is being hit because of the withdrawal. So the judgment made by Biden, eventually, of course, they will have to withdraw from Afghanistan, and then 20-year war has to come to an end. Eventually, of course, somewhere down the road, such a decision was necessary. But now the Afghanistan Republic was about to be disintegrated. I think I have a big question about US strategy about that. Afghanistan, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, as long as it existed, there were major 3 bases. Bagram is one, and another one is Kandahar. Another one, recently, it's not used so much as Sindand. it's to the west of Afghanistan, 3 bases. So for China, or for Pakistan or Central Asian countries, or to Iran, these bases served as a counterweight, but as you know, they are no longer there. It means that for Quad or US, for Quad, West Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, so the strategic value has going to be transformed in a very major way. So that is all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tanaka, very much once again. So following Professor Tanaka, we have Ambassador Yamamoto, the former Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Afghanistan, as well as the head of UNAMA. Ambassador Yamamoto has been the Director General in charge of cultural exchange at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has been the head of the Japanese government mission for UNESCO, and was ambassador to Hungary, as well as the Japanese government representative, Secretary General. From 2016 to 2020, he was the head of the UNAMA. What is in the backdrop of the speed of the fall of Kabul? What may be the issues to do with the peace process, and how should the international community be involved going forward? So I need to say a few words of greetings at the very beginning. I cannot see the screen myself, but as has been kindly introduced just now, for 5 years and 4 months, I was in Afghanistan working for the United Nations. For the first 1.5 years, I was at the #2 position, but in 2016, June, for almost 4 years, I was heading the UNAMA. There has been 5,000 or so people who were working under the UNAMA. I was heading the mission. So in Afghanistan, I have been involved with the Afghanistan government people as well as Taliban. I had many discussions and dialogue. I had also been talking with the China and other countries, as well as the surrounding the countries and all the countries involved. So I would like to speak from my own experience. I have left my mission was in 2019 on the 29th of February with the Taliban agreement, and it was 8th of March in Afghanistan. The Ghani, the government has been born. So having seen all this, I have changed over to my successor. So now I would like to share the screen. Today, there are 4 points that I would like to make. That is, unexpectedly, the Ghani administration has fallen. And what has happened behind such moves, and Afghanistan's own efforts, as well as international community efforts, will continue. It is just being started. And then what should be the role to be played by the international community? And with what has happened in thinking about peace building, what are the elements that we need to consider, and what should be the lessons that we should learn from what has been happening up until now? First of all, unexpectedly, in a very fast manner, the Afghanistan government has collapsed. There has been many different factors, but one element is the withdrawal of the US military. So this has undoubtedly had a major impact. The withdrawal of the US forces have been based upon the US government, the Taliban agreement. But what was in the premise and prerequisite of that the peace negotiation will be progressing, and the Afghanistan, the national forces would be able to survive. So everyone was expecting and envisaging that withdrawal will go in parallel with the peace talks. But the peace talks have stalled. But even with such stagnation, the US have continued to withdraw. The reason why there has been a stagnated peace talks, I will be giving more of a detail later. But Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic nation, and the local districts had a very strong control over their own community. So historically speaking, it was very, very difficult to try to bring them together from political point of view. But with the Islamic Republic being born, so difficult, the ethnic and tribal, the arrangements, it was very difficult to try to unify them, even under Karzai or even under Ghani. But they have rendered his hand. President Karzai has made all sorts of different efforts to try to work with the different groups. But President Ghani, because he used to work under the World Bank, he wanted to make Afghanistan more of a modern state. He was more forcible, and that may have led from time to time the negative reaction from the local tribal leaders. So in order to have effective progress to be seen for the negotiation with Taliban, the government had to be unified with the different groups coming together in consensus, but it was very, very difficult. Even with the peace talks being officially started, the government group was not able to be unified politically. One specific example is the presidential election in 2014 and 2019. President Ghani has won the election twice. For both occasions, there has been confusion seen inside the country. It was almost a civil war, and Secretary Kelly had to work as an intermediary and try to go over the constitution. A supra-constitutional arrangement that was taken in 2019 as an election. Technically speaking, it was quite a fair election, seeing that Afghanistan was a developing state, but the losers was not able to admit their defeat. So it was a very difficult situation. At the time of inauguration on the 8th of March, Ghani and Abdullah both has made an oath of the inauguration as the president. So this kind of confusion did not have a positive effect on the peace talks. The third point is Afghanistan is one of the least developed countries. The population, half of the population is below the poverty line, which is 8 cents per day, meaning that one person cannot really eat for even a day. And because of the conflict and civil war, it was a very difficult situation. But to the Afghan people, the government was not able to win the trust and confidence of the people. And that is something that we need to admit. And even more of a problem was that the assistance to Afghanistan was huge. Indeed, enormous amount of money was invested. Initially, with the US forces coming in, there was enormous amount of the money being spent. But for Afghanistan, the economy was not well developed, and the society was not able to digest and absorb. So the excessive the money has been spent for corruption. So corruption meant that the haves and have-nots, the disparity between the two has widened. And the Afghan the people had come to distrust and mistrust the government. And unfortunately, this is a fact. And I was gravely concerned of this myself. United Nations for the corruption, in order to make investigation of the corruption, may be highly risky to the individuals. The United Nations was not engaged in such corruption investigation, but we have made efforts so that annual report on corruption will be published. 4 reports that have been published. Some improvement has been seen, but this is still a tenuous problem. The next point is the Afghan National Army was to be sustained and maintained if and when the US forces were to withdraw. US and NATO forces that have spent money and have made great efforts. The special forces comprised with the elite the army the members, they will not lose in any fight. They had first world-class capability, but the number was too small. And when it comes to fighting, I am not, of course, a professional myself, but what I have been told is that ability to fight itself is important, but how to plan the operational and tactical plan, as well as logistics, these are also important. For many, many years, the NATO and the US have made efforts to try to nurture the national army, but when it comes to tactical planning and logistics, they had to still depend upon the outsiders, experts. So when the US forces were to withdraw, they may have able to maintain the ability to fight, but when it comes to logistics, planning and tactical planning, they did not have the capability at all. Now, on the Taliban, as Professor Tanaka has been explaining, there are all sorts of difficulties involved. From 2018 onwards, they have been increasingly recognized internationally. And because of the war and the fighting in up the wall, and they had to that actually recognize the Taliban, the counterparty. And this was quite evident in 2018 when Russia in Moscow, they have held the Moscow process, and officially the Taliban was invited to the peace talks so that they will be able to discuss and have exchange of views with the Afghan government. And then Taliban have visited different countries, Indonesia, as well as European countries and other countries. So international acceptance have increased for Taliban. Taliban has increasingly gained legitimacy in the international community, and that has given Taliban high spirits. And the fighting, even though it was in into a head, but still Taliban was bit by bit gaining the grounds. And as far as I have seen, Taliban in the 1990s, they have started their offensive from the northern the region, which they were not able to bring under control back in the 1990s. If they can bring the northern region under their control, they will be able to conquer the whole of the country. That I'm sure have been their strategy. Now about the peace negotiation. For the Afghan government and the Taliban are supposed to talk to each other, but that actually did not happen. For the government, they thought that the counterparty was the Taliban. Therefore, in February of 2018, at the international conference, the Kabul conference was held in order to start the peace the process. And the President Ghani has invited Taliban that no conditions will be attached for the talk to start. And at the Eid, there has been 3 days of temporal ceasefire. So the US government has been able to talk to Taliban henceforth. But Taliban did not really agree to this. Taliban thought that it was not the Afghanistan government. They thought that they were the legitimate the government. They were the ones legitimately to represent the Afghanistan. And they were beaten, not by the Afghanistan government, but by the occupying the forces. So the fight was to kick out the occupying forces, the United States. So it should be the NATO and the US government, from the Taliban's perspective, to be the counterparty to negotiation. So the Afghan government itself was not to be the counterparty. They had very strict stance on this. So the peace talks for many, many years was not able to come to fruition. So US government, against this backdrop, if they were to accept what Taliban was asserting, that the Afghanistan government was not to be the legitimate counterparty. So US government did not acknowledge Taliban to be their counterparty to negotiation, but realistically speaking, from the military point of view, Taliban had to be recognized. So by making clear that the legitimacy was not to be with the Taliban, but they would nonetheless begin the talks with the Taliban. On the 29th of February 2020, the agreement was reached between the US government and Taliban. But Taliban was very strategic in their thinking, because it is internationally well known for the parties to conflict, when they come to peace talks table, it says mutually hurting stalemate, that either side would be hit at a gridlock, that they cannot hurt the other side the more. Both were to be in the same state. In order to see a breakthrough, negotiation from the position of strength needs to be gained. That would be the strategy to be undertaken. So even with the negotiation is started, the fight still continues. That is the normal situation. But the Taliban has gone even further step forward, fight and negotiate. They have opted for this, and they were quite successful. That is the reason why we are in a situation today. But what would be the role of the international community when it comes to negotiation? Through dialogue, through discussion, we need to bring stability and prosperity to Afghanistan. And that role has not ended yet. So I have stated here the negotiation is not over. That is because when the peace negotiation was continued, the goal was to represent the people of Afghanistan, to have a dignity of people, including the rights of the women and minority, to be respected, that Afghanistan will not be a threat to the surrounding countries, and to create a prosperous Afghanistan. The goals have not changed at all. Goals are still there. This is for the international community, and these goals are also what the Afghan people are aspiring to. And we need to continue to ask the Taliban to achieve these goals. And this, I believe, is quite possible. As Professor Tanaka has already mentioned, I should not be going into details. We need to have Taliban understand the importance of gaining trust and confidence of the people of Afghanistan and international community to try to establish inclusive government. What Taliban thinks of what is being inclusive and what we define as inclusive may be different. As it seems, the Taliban think that some representatives to be included, but more substantively in Afghanistan, the political power and political reality needs to be reflected. So we need women also to be included in the administration, but there is still a long way to go when it comes to persuading Taliban. And what we need to have Taliban to show is a policy where words and deeds match together so that they can gain the trust and confidence of the people. The Taliban has already stated that they would give pardons, amnesty. But this should not be just ending as words, but they should put this into action. But what the information we have received is that the instruction from the leadership of Taliban has not penetrated to the rank and file. So people are still murdered and killed. And the Taliban the members go house to house, and they would search the people. And the women cannot be active. They cannot even play music, for example. So looking at the reality, what is the situation may be different from province to province, where there is lax and loose. Even the women are allowed to go to high schools in some provinces. So as the time elapses and the situation develops, I very much hope that the Taliban, even to the rank and file position, will understand the importance of all these things. And we need to have the national basic policy to be established. What should be the role to be played by the international community? First and foremost, before talking to Taliban, the international community itself needs to think on their own to bring the interest of the Afghan people first. Some countries have always thought of their own strategic interest or economic interest first, try to preserve them or try to realize their interests, have used and utilized Afghanistan. These are some of the views that are held by different groups, and this would not do. So if you do think of your own national interest first, in the international community, you cannot really work as a consensus. You need to be unified as the international community to have unified message to the Taliban government. Inclusive policy is something very difficult and complicated. The Taliban may think that this country says certain things, but the other country says different things. That would not do. International community must be unified. And also, some people in the international community think that this is defeat. So they may try to retaliate to the Taliban, not to cooperate with Taliban, and that should be refrained from. Thinking about the future of Afghanistan, the international community should reflect upon themselves and try to work with the Taliban. And what do we need to respond? There are three major issues. If you could end in just 1 or 2 minutes. Yes, I should try to wrap up. As an urgent response, humanitarian assistance and refugee assistance. But the important thing is what the others does not say. The political message, unified message, should continue to be sent. We cannot forget that the Taliban will not understand without such unified continued message. And more specifically, what should be the basic policy? The Taliban leaders, as I have mentioned earlier, they're thinking about their future. They do understand the many things. Almost once a month, I have talked with the Taliban the leaders. They are the actual patriots. They're always thinking seriously about what to do with Afghanistan itself. So we should convey our message to them. And it will be highly complicated if there are all sorts of different things happening. And terrorism, acts of terror must be eliminated. And the Taliban has not been designated as a terrorist group, even by the United Nations or the United States. So for Al-Qaeda and for ISIS, the sanctions for them are very different from what may be the sanctions on Taliban. In just one word, a series of developments recently, as Ms. Horiba has already mentioned earlier, we need to rethink about the peace building and nation building seriously and sincerely. There are many things that we need to review on and learn lessons of. As Henry Kissinger has recently wrote, for Afghanistan, that we have tried to have to force on false democratic system, and what to think about the development. It is not just having enormous money to be put in. That is not the necessary assistance for the Afghanistan. We need to scrutinize what is happening in Afghanistan. We need to collaborate, and we need to work closely with Afghanistan. What is it that we were not able to ameliorate the poverty? Because from time to time, what is attainable, the goal setting should have been done, and the international community to try to consistently respond and to review on the process. That is very important. Thank you very much, Ambassador Yamamoto. So can you have your screen to be delineated? And now I would like to ask the General Secretary of CWS Japan and co-chairperson of Japan Platform, Mr. Takeshi Komino, will be the next speaker. Mr. Komino himself had the experience of engaged in assisting the Afghanistan. So what is happening on the ground, and what should be the challenges for assistance, and how should Japan be involved? So please.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I am Komino of CRS Japan and Japan Platform. Well, in the interest of time, I will immediately go to the substance of my presentation, but I'd like to introduce myself. I have been involved with Afghanistan, and it started in 2003. For the first time, I went there, and from the year 2004, I was involved in the assistance activities in Afghanistan. The project that I was involved was the Center for Children in order to overcome the trauma caused by wars. The photograph is in Bamiyan, and also we had a similar operation in Kabul before. The multiracial children understand mutually, they accept one another, and they were positive in keeping and developing their lives. I was very much moved. Since then, I became to get involved with the emergency humanitarian assistance as well as disaster risk reduction. This is the picture of myself when I was younger. At that time, from 2005 until 2015, there was a Hyogo framework of action. This is a DRR framework. So we will monitor the progress together with Afghan civil society and the government. And we began to draft the policies for DRR. In 2011, Strategic National Action Plan became into being. This is the disaster-related policy in Afghanistan. In order to do the launch event, I was moving to Kabul, and that was on the March 11th of 2011. And we arrived in Afghanistan, but in no time, we came back to Japan. So because of those processes at the CWS, in addition to the emergency assistance, we were emphasizing disaster risk reduction. This photograph is the photograph of landslide and deep layer collapse happened in the province of Badakhshan in 2014. There are many places where risk evaluation is not conducted. They have no ways of protecting themselves from natural disaster. So risk communication and disaster-related policy must be promoted by the leadership of the government. And there are some challenges in the government's leadership. We received some assistance from a foreign ministry, and we have conducted a transfer of technology of disaster risk evaluation. This is the photograph of the village in Amla in the province's Nangarhar. Almost every year there are floods and flash floods. There are inundation areas, and topography judgment is done regarding risk areas. So the technology of judging risks for themselves, Afghans must learn that, and by themselves they will understand their risks, and they will discuss a risk reduction. So the safe evacuation place or the passage of evacuation hazard maps would tell them where to contact, what kind of actions should be taken, just like Japanese hazard map. That kind of information would be contained in the disaster mapping. Depending upon the characteristics of the regions, we cooperated in creating such hazard maps. DRR has to be expanded over the entire region of Afghanistan. So we assisted in the formulation of the disaster strategy in Afghanistan. We also assisted in 5-year planning of the nationwide the government on disaster. So I would like to now talk about my concerns regarding the present Afghanistan. I've been watching Afghanistan for the last 20 years. My heart is aching because of the change happening in recent times. Originally, the Taliban has come back this time, and they are at the helm of the government. But before that, the humanitarian crisis was really serious. And even before that, total population is slightly more than 40 million, and near half of them require humanitarian assistance. More than 90% of the people are living at $2 per day or below $2 per day, very poor. In addition to it, most of the public is farmers. But recently there was a serious drought, and there is a growing humanitarian need. 14 million people are in the food crisis and starvation because of drought. About 50% of the land, the agriculture produce is impacted because of the COVID-19. Winter is coming close. So the passing over winter is also an immediate challenge. So ensuring humanitarian assistance access to space is very important. Looking into the statements of various assistance organizations, they are sounding the alarm bells regarding its urgency. For example, UNICEF is saying that 10 million children are needing humanitarian assistance in order to survive. Also, this year alone, 550,000 internally displaced people have been generated because of the current confusion. Market is not functioning. So currency has depreciated and inflation is happening, especially the poor people's lives are under pressure. This is the warning issued by OCHA, Office of Coordinating Humanitarian Affairs. Norwegian assistance organization called NRC is saying that more than 12 million people are seriously in the food crisis. UNHCR is saying to the neighboring countries of Afghanistan to allow them to accept, but the borders are being closed now. Many borders are being closed. So the evacuees must not be sent back to Afghanistan. That is UNHCR is asking the surrounding countries. This is the mapping of the refugees from the start of this year. The central part, Bamiyan, and the northern part, Kunduz, have generated a lot of refugees. Other provinces, the refugees are happening across the country, but from the provinces where Taliban had strong influence, it seems that there are less refugees. Now, natural disaster is considering, for example, the climate change is giving serious impact to Afghanistan. For example, because of the change of precipitation and the short-term torrential rain is bringing about flood. And from the start of this year, flood damage is indicated in the provinces. From the start of this year, more than 30,000 people have been victimized because of the flood. The local currency is Afghani. The local currency is being depreciated very much. dollar-denominated salary is paid. Maybe they are not suffering, but majority of the people are obtaining income in Afghani, and therefore the impact of currency depreciation is very serious to poor people. Afghanistan, as a matter of fact, is a country where import is absolutely more than export, and they are depending upon imports in order to satisfy food needs. The self-sufficiency rate of food has been improved for the past decades, but if inflation continues, situation is going to be miserable and tragic. As I described to you, the crisis is in a state of flux, very urgent. We must face up squarely with the humanitarian needs. At the Japan platform, we are developing our assistance. At present, our plan has three priority objectives. The first one is to assist in order to survive. And from 2001, we are developing our assistance as a Japan platform. We should capitalize upon the experience and the knowledge so that we can respond to the emergency needs immediately. Also, the compound risks and vulnerability must be taken into consideration, and we must have assistance to fortify resilience of Afghanistan. Because of your goodwill and assistance, our activities are being supported. So I hope that you will continue to render your understanding and contribution to our activities. On the 17th of August, we announced a statement as JPF. Why did we do that? The member NGOs would make a lot of assistance, but beyond that, there are so many Afghan people. To these massive Afghan people, they have the humanitarian needs, and we will be facing up with their needs from squarely, and we have stated that we will continue to commit to provide the necessary assistance. Now, these days, there are news reports regarding the evacuation from Kabul airport. Up until now, some tens of thousands of people have evacuated. It's been reported. But one thing is of concern. Such a massive case, can we really do the processing in such a short period of time for the resettlement? Normally, in the case of settlement in third countries, each specific case would be monitored and analyzed. And after that, once they enter the country of settlement, various settlement assistance is provided. CWS especially is implementing the third country settlement activities within the United States from Africa. So we have the infrastructure of assistance, the settlement in third countries. But during the Trump administration, the accepted refugees number drastically was reduced. Before Trump administration, as you can see in this graph, about 80,000 people was the number of refugees. But after Trump administration, it was reduced to one quarter, to the level of 20,000 people. So the capacity of the receiving NGOs had to be reduced accordingly. So how, just the US alone, can they provide the settlement assistance in excess of 100,000 people? We have a US office, we have discussion with the US office. So how do we upgrade the infrastructure to do that? This is the choke point. This is a very difficult point. This is not a matter of the US alone. Japan is also a problem. We will have to accept evacuees within Japanese society. How can we assist them to settle in Japan? Do we have the plan to help resettlement of these people in Japan? We have to consider jointly. Taliban is saying that they will issue amnesty to all people. They will honor the rights of receiving education for women and right to work and so forth. But as other speakers have said, is that really the policy? Are they really walking the talk? So we have to monitor as the international community. With such eyes, we must closely watch the situation in Afghanistan. Lastly, how do we face up with Afghanistan as Japan? I'd like to talk about what Japan can do. As many people have indicated, President Biden of the United States said that US didn't go to Afghanistan to do the nation building. As Professor Tanaka, I am infuriated about this comment. What Japan was targeting is really the assistance for nation building and the human resource building. So we will not abandon Afghanistan people. We will work with them. This must be the message from Japan. We must realize, we must act on this message. What is the country of Afghanistan? Afghanistan should be made as a country by Afghans, as Ambassador said. This is the country which should be built by Afghans, and we, the international community, must help them do that. Probably, maybe because of our intention and our speculations, maybe we have put Afghanistan into throes because of our own intentions. We do our local activities, NATO forces, multinational international security assistance force, ISAF. There are many people who do not regard them as the symbol bringing about freedom. President Karzai, former president, said this, don't make another government within our own government. This is the comment made to the international community. We have our intention, we have our speculations, and we must have put Afghan people into throes. Now, localization is very important. Everybody agrees with that. The localized leadership must be maximized, and we must provide assistance to that end. That is the role of the assistance giving organizations. But Afghanistan is a composite country. There are compound risks complicatedly intertwined. That is the Afghan society. Now, what about we have to have the effective assistance so that Afghan people can really work to that end. We must implement that, not giving out goods, things. It's not assistance. We must make them have a capability and a competence that will be able to analyze risks, to come up with the effective measures. Many Afghans are showing leadership, I know. So we must amplify their leadership by our assistance. I think that is the role to be played by Japan. Last point. So in this current situation, what is the posture of Japan? I think the Japanese posture is being tested. Because other countries do this and that, Japan will do this. That is not the important thing. What is the value orientation that Japan attaches importance? How do you realize it? At the basis of the democracy is the people. We must never forget that viewpoint, so that we want to always consider and implement the effective assistance going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Komino. Now, lastly but not least, we have His Excellency Dr. Shaida Mohammad Abdali, the Ambassador of Afghanistan to Japan. He was assistant to the president in charge of national security, and from 2012 to 2008, he was ambassador of Afghanistan to India, and now he is in Japan. I'm sure that he is very disheartened and pained because of what is happening in his native country, including the message to Japan. If you could explain to us, Your Excellency, please.
Thank you very much. A very good evening to everyone today in the webinar, the distinguished speakers, the participants, media, ladies and gentlemen. And in the outset, let me thank the SPF for organizing this very timely webinar on the situation, the crucial situation in Afghanistan. Let me begin by giving you a brief history of our 20 years long journey, a chapter that was just folded a few days ago. And I'll have to answer three basic questions as to how this chapter began and how was it ended and the way forward. As you all know, the chapter that was just folded began with the incident of September 11, and the main mission in the post-2001 era was to fight terrorism and rebuild Afghanistan. A global alliance of more than 40 countries, led by the United States, engaged both in civilian and military efforts. The joint effort in collaboration of Afghans provided Afghanistan with great many achievements over the last 20 years. Of course, the achievements are too many, but let me highlight some of them as example. For example, education in health, and women in empowerment and women's rights, civil societies, institutions in Afghanistan, infrastructure, the vibrant media are just few examples. But to everyone's surprise, we saw an abrupt end of this chapter that began 20 years ago in a terrible way in just about 10 days. Now, this chapter, how was it founded? It is very important to mention who was key player in the foundation of this very important chapter of the last 20 years with so many achievements that we had. Japan convened the first Tokyo conference, followed by, in 2002, followed by another one in 2012, with over $7 billion assistance to Afghanistan from Japan that made Japan the second largest donor to Afghanistan. And there are, of course, so many development activities that happened with the help of Japan and Afghanistan, from development projects to construction of schools, health facilities, the international Ahmed Karzai International Airport, and hundreds of Afghan students graduated from Japan over the last 20 years, more than 600. And of course, the special relationship between Afghanistan and Japan over the last 20 years will be best defined by an individual named Dr. Nakamura, who invested more than half of his life in the well-being of the Afghan people and eventually lost his life in Afghanistan. This is how Japan is known in Afghanistan in the context of what Dr. Nakamura did. And today he is a household name and known in Afghanistan as the uncle of Afghanistan. And lastly, with regard to the continued cooperation and assistance, the Geneva conference, where Japan donated or assisted another $720 million. Now, how was this chapter supposed to end? Unlike what we saw in the last 2 weeks. Towards the end of transition in 2014, there was a global and national consensus on a political solution of Afghanistan rather than military. And then afterwards, there was an on-off peace talks till we had a very ambitious peace plan under former US President Trump era. And that phase, that peace plan had 2 phases. Number one, the US Taliban peace deal, and followed by the intra-Afghan peace deal. But the direct peace talks between the Taliban and the US obviously gave an upper hand and more legitimacy to the Taliban, and obviously undermined the government in Afghanistan with regard to its legitimacy and credibility. And the US Taliban agreement signed after 18 months in 2020 February. But that phase of talks was supposed to facilitate an intra-Afghan dialogue. But before that phase was started, there were conditions from both sides, the Republic side and the Taliban side. The Taliban asked for the prisoners' release and the delisting of their leader's name from the UN blacklist. But then before that intra-Afghan dialogue was supposed to begin, we in Afghanistan faced with the new government that came up after disputed elections, and then causing for that government a weaker legitimacy and lack of unity to have a support behind that new government. So because of that and many other reasons, there was a stalemate before the intra-Afghan dialogue begins. But of course, the Afghan government had its own conditions, such as the ceasefire and guarantees from the regional international actors. While we were involved in facilitating the intra-Afghan peace dialogue, there was an effort at the region level, particularly involving Russia, China, and Iran in collaboration with Pakistan to begin the intra-Afghan peace talks. But despite scores of conferences and mechanisms in place, there was no meaningful intra-Afghan dialogue. But then what were the key challenges on the road to political settlement? Number one, an international fatigue. By the time the intra-Afghan dialogue was supposed to begin, there was a massive international fatigue among the international community. And that led the United States and NATO with a conditionless withdrawal deadline. And of course, that conditionless withdrawal for the first time led to the demoralization of the Afghan National Security Forces in Afghanistan. Plus, the lack of unity among leaders on the Republic side under former President Ghani. And of course, within the system, a widespread corruption. One of the reasons for that was due to uncertainty on the future of Afghanistan. While this was the case in Afghanistan, there was every reason for the Taliban to wait the United States and NATO out. So based on the US-Taliban deal, the US had to withdraw its troops prematurely. So where we are now, we are facing a failure of that political process that began years ago. When that failure of political process facilitated the collapse of the Afghan government unexpectedly and probably unprecedentedly. As mentioned, everyone involved had a stake in this failure. Even the Taliban, as they say, did not want and expect such a collapse. A smoother political transition through negotiation would have safeguarded against the consequences of government collapse, both politically and militarily. But of course, to know the exact causes, there is a need for a thorough research on the causes involved as to how this collapse happened. In a nutshell, I would use an analogy of Afghanistan being a patient on life support abandoned in the middle of treatment. So where we are going now, there are two foreseeable scenarios. Number one, to revive some, if not all, the gains made over the last 20 years. And the second would be the loss of our gains that were made in the last 20 years. Number one, to revive, we have to build on our 20 years long effort. To do that, we need to deal with the new ground reality and hold on our shared values and gains. Again, how to do that? We have to assist the formation of an inclusive new Afghan government that is acceptable to Afghans as well as the international community. But this is again, in the short term, an ambitious goal. This might take time, but before we reach that objective, there is an urgent need to help the Afghan people. We have Afghanistan, we may not have a government at this stage. Of course, that assistance could be channeled through United Nations agencies and other international NGOs working in Afghanistan and the rest of the world. And how would the loss of war gains happen if Afghanistan is neglected, like it was neglected in the post-Soviet withdrawal? Disregarding the non-Taliban leadership in Afghanistan in the future Afghan government will lead us to that failure once again. If tensions between regional and global powers are not dealt with, we must confess a serious tension that still exists within the region on the issue of Afghanistan. If the threat of ISIS is not addressed collectively, and we just saw in the last few days a number of incidents in Afghanistan claimed by ISIS. This is a new threat, and we must face this threat collectively. So not addressing all of the above, there is every chance of another bloody war in Afghanistan. So what is our short-term priority to bridge for a smoother transition for the government and for the objectives to be achieved, as I mentioned earlier? Aid must not be politicized for Afghanistan. There's a need for urgent humanitarian assistance to prevent the influx of more Afghan refugees around the world. And of course, you have seen the terrible scenes at Kabul International Airport. But again, that requires a mechanism. As I said earlier, the 20 years long achievements were built on a very solid foundation. And that foundation was laid out by our friendly country, Japan. I think it is time for another effort led by Japan to convene an international aid assistance support conference on Afghanistan so that the support from all over the countries are channeled to prevent a serious situation in Afghanistan. And I think Japan is well positioned to lead that effort. You all know over 500,000 families have been displaced in the last few months, and millions others are in need of immediate assistance. While we approach the seriousness of Afghanistan's situation, we must focus strongly on removing the tensions and finding a common ground between regional and global powers on Afghanistan. To support an Afghan own effort for an inclusive Afghan government acceptable to Afghans and the international community. As you have all heard, the Taliban have been positive so far on the idea of having an inclusive Afghan government. But of course, deeds matter, not words. And we have to try to encourage the Taliban to adhere to those rules and to adhere to a government that is acceptable to the Afghan people and the international community. To conclude, the cost of saving Afghanistan today is much lesser than the cost of saving Afghanistan later. And most important of all, let's not forget the dangers that Afghanistan and an unstable Afghanistan can pose to the world, to the region once again. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Abdali, thank you very much. Now then, dear speakers, please turn our video camera on. From this point onward, I will ask Professor Ishii Masako, College of Intercultural Communication, Professor Rikyo University, to moderate the panel discussion. Thank you very much. We have received the questions from the participants, and based upon those questions, I will give the questions to the speakers. Today, we had fantastic 4 speakers. We had invaluable reports and presentation by these speakers. And there were so many questions we received, but the time is limited. Therefore, in the order of report, I will sort of consolidate the questions that we received from the participants. We will not be able to respond to all questions in the interest of time. I'm very sorry about that. I hope you understand. First of all, questions to Professor Tanaka. Mainly on 3 points, we have questions. First of all, 2020, in February, Trump administration had a peace negotiation with the Taliban in Qatar. In that situation, Afghan government was placed outside the negotiation. Was there any criticism coming from international community about that, about not including Afghan government? You said that going forward, the Sharia is going to be the base of the governance. The Taliban's ability to govern, how do you evaluate Taliban's ability to govern? And they will need international recognition if they want to really have the governance. What will be the stage which would allow the international community to give recognition to Taliban? The third question is regarding IS. IS and Taliban, how come that they are not in good terms? How come that they are confrontational against one another? Through the political change at this time, IS is going to expand its power? Is there such a possibility? So these are the 3 questions to Professor Tanaka. Please. Thank you very much for the questions. First of all, Doha Agreement, Doha Accord, criticism from the international community. There were a lot of criticisms from Afghan-related people, but international community or the governments were not like that. I think they were just not paying attention to Trump's accord. So at that time, there were no governments which would oppose so strongly. As a afterthought, it was too late. We just let it happen. And as a result, the consequence of abandoning that is what we have now. The second question, Sharia. The governance capability of Taliban, the question. Organizational way, the administrative organization, Taliban, during the 1990s, even Taliban never showed any ability to govern administratively, or they can appoint people, they can have the decree and so forth, but there was no administrative capability to implement what they decide. There are many reasons after the internal, because you see the internal wars continued, and before that they were fighting against the Soviet Union. So Mujahideen or Taliban activists were not able to read or write. So the notice comes, a decree comes from the government, but nobody understands that. So that was the precarious situation. What is happening now? Everybody can read and write. I don't think we can guarantee that they can be literate. So I think the hurdle for administrative governance would be very hard. Now, the international recognition, it depends upon the respective governments of the world. During the 1990s, Pakistan, UAE, Saudi Arabia, 3 countries recognized the Taliban government, but because they had their specific reasons. But this time around, regarding these countries may decide to recognize for their specific reasons. But at the United Nations General Assembly, the giving a seat to Taliban, it is the matter of Security Council of the United Nations. So veto is held by the permanent 5 of Security Council. Even so the Russia and the China may agree, but US, France, and UK may oppose. And even one country vetoes, the entire process will stop. What will be the attitude of Japan? Nothing is decided yet. Taliban and IS relationship. Originally, under Taliban, Al-Qaeda exists. That is one problem. Al-Qaeda for Taliban is loyal. So under Taliban, Al-Qaeda exists. That is the situation in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda regards IS as a subordinate organization, but they were excommunicated from Taliban. So IS moved to Syria, and they were waged in a very fierce battle. One of the fighting had a ripple effect in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So Al-Qaeda was protected under Taliban, and Al-Qaeda is loyal to Taliban. So Taliban is the above organization of Al-Qaeda. That is the structure that we see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms
Thank you very much. In terms of state building and the national consensus, we understand that there are many challenges. Thank you very much. We go to the next speaker.
Now I would like to turn to Ambassador Yamamoto for 4 questions to him. For the 2 decades of the international community being involved and engaged, perhaps we need to reflect upon ourselves, is something that you have mentioned during your presentation. And also corruption and bribery were also mentioned. And from these perspectives, the international community to try to support and assist, try to bring in assets and resources from outside may have been the cause, the root cause of the corruption. Is this true or not? And in order to minimize the corruption, what should the international community do, and what has been done by the international community? We would like to hear your take, please. On this issue, there have been many studies and reviews being made. In particular, I believe what is being done, the good, is done by the United States. The SIGAR is an auditing organization, and for the assistance to Afghanistan, whether it has been done effectively or had it invited any corruption or not. They have made in-depth research, and they have come up with a conclusion which is quite harsh and strict. As I have briefly mentioned earlier in my presentation, what has come in initially, the money coming in from outside, was not something to be absorbed and digested by Afghanistan itself properly. And President Karzai was quite angered at one time. The PRC, the military itself, to implement the development program for the communities. And there have been many petitions and by the governors and mayors were done to the military and not to the government. Even though the government was trying to move forward with well-balanced development program, they were not able to do so. So, and furthermore, as the questioner has mentioned, money could lead to corruption, and that actually happened, unfortunately. This is something we need to think duly. But how to prevent this to happen? This is quite difficult. First of all, we need efforts on both sides. The donors themselves need to have strict auditing. And even before that, what we need to think about is what kind of program needs to be designed and implemented. Even with a strict auditing, that would just look into the results. I'm not trying to look at human beings that they are naturally born bad, but when it involves money, it tends to corrupt. Now, for the receiving side, for the host country, there's also difficulty as well. When the societal system is not that organized, like what we have seen in Afghanistan. Looking at the structure, it is not really a corruption, but this was also true for Japan. If something is done to you, you would give something in return, in appreciation, by way of a thank you. This is a social or societal practice. And this was also true for Afghanistan as well. And when loads of money was coming in, and the return, the gifts to be given in return have turned into corruption and bribery. So you need this very strict ethical system, and the administrative organization, the government, that needs to restrain itself, have a very strict discipline. But how can eradicate corruption by the United Nations for each and every administrative unit? What kind of legal means and systems should be put in place in order to avoid the corruption? And if the system is in place, we have actually studied whether the system was actually functioning as well. But under the official and normal situation, the auditing was done for just official and formal situation. There has been a skewed distribution of the wealth to the local powers. So it was very difficult to try to scrutinize everything. But this is not impossible, but it is quite difficult. The donors themselves need to make tremendous efforts. We cannot just ask the hosting country to do everything. There are two additional questions. The self-defense force aircraft was not able to sufficiently evacuate the cooperators in Afghanistan. What was the biggest cause of this? And Japanese Foreign Ministry, what kind of response can the ministry undertake going forward? Another question is, international community should work in unison to send unified message to the Taliban. That is important, is what you have mentioned as important. But on the other hand, the new great game may be played. And thinking of this, international community, the working consensus may be quite a difficult thing to do. So how would you assess the reality, please? As to your first question, I'm not really sure whether it is appropriate or not. As far as I know, looking at the Japanese embassy in Afghanistan under the Japanese ambassador, they have made painstaking efforts in trying to make the evacuation to happen. But unfortunately, because of the suicidal bombing that happened, and the Afghanistan staff were on the bus, but the bus was not able to come into the airport. We do not know what actually happened. So unless we have all the facts, I don't think the outsiders like ourselves can say anything. I'm sure the government of Japan have done everything to make it happen. But then what can we do? Try to do to save the remaining people. What to do going forward. I'm not really sure whether this is proper for me to say this. So I would like to refrain from mentioning this. I don't think it is the situation that we can do nothing. That is not the case. I think there's certain things that we can do. Now, about the question whether the international community may find it difficult to come to consensus. It may be true if we are to try to reach consensus for everything, but what we are trying to do right now are the United States, China, Russia, and Pakistan have been working as a quad, the Peace Plus. The four countries have been talking to each other in trying to respond to Afghanistan, trying to save Afghanistan. So when the four countries can come to consensus, they have come up with the agreed statement. The Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan should be avoided, was one statement being given. And the dialogue should be the way to go for the peace to be achieved. The militarily means the the means by using force should not be undertaken. And also inclusiveness, more inclusive government is something needed. Those are the fundamental issues. And I'm sure the four countries can agree. And they have been working in unison. So those are the things I have mentioned. So for the fundamental important issues, US, China, Russia, Pakistan, and Japan, everyone is thinking about the same thing. So asking for inclusive government, without that, it will not do for education for the women and all things that have already been achieved in the past 2 decades. Those are important, should be sent as a message, a unified message, and every country can come to agreement. And this has also been included in the UN Security Council resolution as well. But when it comes to details, the technical aspects, including the bilateral relationships, there are things that the countries cannot agree to, but that is something to be accepted. But for the major issues, everyone can agree. So they need to agree. But in order to make this happen, you cannot let the things to flow naturally. Someone needs to take the initiative. Japan can do that. Or if nobody else would take, United Nations can take the initiative, or perhaps China can take the lead. Anyone can take the lead, try to bring the international community together to send a unified message to Afghanistan. That would be very important, not to have the Taliban to misunderstand. And this is a good opportunity for Taliban to try to respond to the expectation of the international community. We should admit that, recognize that, and commend them, applaud them. Now, within Taliban, there are all sorts of information coming in to me. There are all sorts of different views and opinions, it seems, inside Taliban. So for the leadership of Taliban, for them to be accepted by the international community, they should admit the wrongdoing in the past and trying to come up with the better policy going forward. There are those people inside Taliban. They're trying to make tremendous efforts. They're trying to persuade the others. And if they're successful, we should recognize that, applaud that. If not, those people will lose face and lose their positions. We should try to make friends, those people inside the Taliban. We should find some friends inside the Taliban and try to make sure that they would not be embarrassed, try to support them. That should be done by the international community.
Thank you very much. Your comments were quite instructive. Next question is addressed to Komino-san. There was a question about evacuation. NGOs, you worked in NGOs, staffs were working in NGOs, and these people may be feeling very uneasy about the situation. The voices from the real situation, what kind of voices have you heard? Can you talk about what kind of voices you heard from the field? According to the media report, people are fearful of Taliban. I think it's been emphasized in the media report. People are scared of Taliban, but actually from the field, those people who live in Afghanistan, they have dealt with the various forces and they have managed their lives, having faced with a lot of different forces. To the extent that you know, Mr. Komino, so in response to the political change this time, NGOs or international community until now have done certain things. The local people have worked for the nation building. They have built so much. And going forward, it shouldn't be back to zero. We must build on what was gained in the last 20 years. Are there any movements as such? It is reported as if what is gained in the 20 years is going to return to nothing, zero, according to certain medias. But do you hear other views? So this is the reason why I'm asking this question. Thank you very much, Professor Ishii. I have a daily communication with the field in Afghanistan. To be honest with you, there are a variety of voices, so many different voices. Some people are taking advantage of the confusion, and they want to reap a profit from attacking other people. And there are many people who are fearful of such possible risks. They are fearful of their lives, so they have to be evacuated. Not the person himself or herself could be evacuated, but they can't leave their family members behind. So including their family members, we have to support them evacuation. We have to continue. Kabul International Airport operation is over, but in Islamabad airport, various countries have begun processing the refugees. So from the third countries, we can do the processing, and Pakistan and other neighboring countries, people can go into these countries. This kind of diplomatic efforts would be important. What are the voices coming from the field? Depending upon the person, voices are different. Consistently, what I hear is anxiety, uneasiness. Taliban is going to take the government, but who is going to keep what kind of position? Talk about banks. In 1 week, you can withdraw only $200, and website of central bank is not functioning, so you don't know the exchange rate. So there are so many uncertainties. Things are not known, so people are uneasy about it. So whoever you ask the question, everybody will say that they are anxious. But there are people going beyond. Some people lost hope in Afghanistan. So they have no hope for their children, so they want to evacuate abroad. All other people will say that because of this situation, they have to rebuild Afghanistan, rebuild their own country. So with this political change, their future, their family's future, it depends upon how people perceive. So voices are not uniform. As I mentioned in my presentation, the evacuees have rights to evacuate, and we must support these people evacuate. But as I said, because of this situation, they want to remain in Afghanistan and continue working in Afghanistan. There are quite a large number of people saying so. So when I have a discussion with these people, I have a strong urge that we must help them, those people remaining in Afghanistan, to rebuild the country. Professor Ishii said that it's not going back to zero. I have no intention. I have no idea. I don't believe that it's going to return to zero. For the last 20 years, fantastic, competent Afghans. There are so many people, they are coming back. And maybe there are people evacuating abroad, but there are so many brightest people coming back. So together with them, we must respect their leadership in working, not by our rules. We should work by their rules, depending upon their leadership. Then we will never go back to zero. We will be able to rebuild the country. Thank you very much. Now, next, lastly, we will go to the ambassador.
Now, from the presentation by His Excellency, education, the health, the rights of the women, the civil society, the media, and so forth, in many areas, great progress has been seen for the past 20 years, as mentioned. And in order to continue those the benefits for the future, what should be done? On the other hand, the Taliban that has taken over. How would you think that we should respond, please?
Thank you. Yes, definitely. It is sad to see that kind of situation abruptly happening in Afghanistan, but it's still not too late to rescue most of the achievements of the last 20 years. Yes, many of them were damaged by the collapse of the government 10 days ago, but there is an opportunity to rescue you mentioned rightly the educated Afghans, particularly those Afghans who were provided the capacity to lead the country. When the transition was completed in 2014, was based on the Afghan capacity that came into being in Afghanistan. So that capacity still exists. Unfortunately, some left, but the vast majority of Afghans who benefited from the gains of the last 20 years are still there in Afghanistan. And for example, the Afghan national security forces, yes, they've gone to homes, but they are still one of the best trained soldiers in Afghanistan. They can be remobilized in Afghanistan, new government. And certainly the inclusive government is the foundation for those gains to be revived. That should be the focus right now. Before we have a new government, we should do everything to ensure that we create or establish the foundation for the revival of the last 20 years gains. It is possible. It will take time, but definitely possible, because we have the foundation for that revival, which include the media, the vibrant media. We have the international or local channels still functioning in Afghanistan. And we still have the educated youths in Afghanistan. We have the universities running, government, more than 200 universities still running in Afghanistan. So the foundation for that exists, but to regenerate, to revive them, we need a government that's inclusive, representative of all Afghans, men and women. And the Taliban have spoken positively so far. But we have to, as mentioned by all speakers, have a unified call by the international community to reinforce the call of Afghans who also want the same inclusive government that the international community wants. So it's possible, and we hope that we immediately react to the new situation of Afghanistan in a positive way, in an engaged way. The Taliban, as you said earlier, are in power, and no doubt about that. That's a new ground reality. We like it or not, we have to deal with it. Engaging Afghanistan will mean that it's possible that the NEF government is such that the international community will have a support behind, and the Afghan people will be able to live their life better and sustainably. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。実はちょうど時間になってしまったんですけれど。
Exactly, we hit the closing time. But there is one more question that we want to ask the ambassador. It's going to be the last question. Ambassador, from Mr. Komine's speaking and from Ambassador's remarks, we must look into the things that we have achieved until now. And there must be a inclusive nation building where everybody can participate. I think Ambassador Yamamoto spoke about that. So this question may be difficult for the ambassador, but there are so many people worried about it. So I dare ask this question. Ambassador, what is the prospect of your returning back to Afghanistan? Do you have any ideas about your departure?
Well, is this question posed to me?
Yes, this is a question to Ambassador. With the change in government that has happened, this may be a very difficult situation right now. So we are quite worried. So have you been ordered to go back to Afghanistan, for example? Do you think that this may happen?
No, ma'am. We are all in a wait and watch situation as everybody else. And there's a change in Afghanistan. And we're waiting for, any instruction, in the future vis-a-vis Afghan missions, including Japan.
どうもありがとうございました。今日は
Thank you very much. From the speakers today, we were given deep insight and knowledge. We benefited greatly from the speakers' reports. We could learn a lot. Thank you very much. Now with this, I'd like to close the discussion of this webinar, and I'd like to turn the microphone back to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Ms. Horiba, please take the floor. Professor Ishii, the moderator, thank you very much for moderating the discussion. This is the closing time, so we will end the program. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation. Thank you very much. Thank you.